Welcome to the audiobook, The Pharaoh and His Desire, written by sfujitsuka, narrated by 𝗛𝗲𝗄. Noah. Rolling over, I snatched my phone from the bedside table and hit snooze for the 5th time. Waking up never came easy to me since I usually didn't go to bed until 3 or 4 in the morning. It used to make my mum furious, and as a Latina, that was never a pretty sight. She would constantly get up throughout the night to check and make sure I wasn't on my phone or laptop. But now she was gone. Now I could do whatever I wanted, and no one would notice, especially my father. Groaning, I finally pulled myself out of bed and walked into the adjoining bathroom. At least today school wouldn't suck, I thought to myself as I turned on the water and began to brush my teeth. Today we were going on a field trip to visit some limited exhibition that had just been unearthed in Egypt a few years ago and finally had made its way to Washington, D.C.'s Smithsonian. Popping my contacts in, I examined my puffy, sleep-deprived bottle green eyes. Pulling back from the mirror, I tied my long, thick hair up into a ponytail, and without even thinking, I grabbed my usual, some ripped jeans and a man's white V-neck. I was on the taller side, around 5'8", 173 centimetres, and girls' white V-necks were never long enough for my torso. Plus, the extra room helped to hide my larger chest, which I was a bit self-conscious of. Sliding on my mum's amethyst ring, I quickly grabbed my navy Jansport backpack and trotted down the steps. "Dad, I'm leaving!" I yelled as I pulled on my worn-in black Converse and reached for the car keys. Hearing no reply, I hesitantly crept into the living room and let out a breath I didn't realise I had been holding. There he laid, passed out on his recliner, with a near-empty bottle of whiskey next to him. Go figure. While my mother was born and raised in Argentina, my father referred to himself as a European mutt. However, his towering height, blonde hair and emerald eyes suggested he was of North European descent. Sighing, I glanced at the clock, realising I was already running late. Giving a sympathetic look towards my passed-out father, I quickly ran into the bathroom and grabbed some aspirin and a glass of water from the kitchen, leaving it next to him with a note saying, "I hope you have a good day at work." I bolted out the door in a vain attempt to save time. I know what you're thinking. Same old story. Parent passes away and the other spouse turns to alcohol, leaving the poor child alone and rebellious. Well, you're absolutely right. I loved my father very much, and his love of the old glug-glug allowed me to get away with so much. To live my life any way I wanted without worrying that I would get caught or grounded. I took care of him, never made him feel guilty or commented on his alcoholism, and rewarded me for staying out of my business. For me, it was an all-round win. Selfish, I know, but I was having the time of my life. I didn't see myself living very long anyway. As I walked outside, I saw my neighbour leaning against my car with his arms crossed and a very pissed-off look on his face. His name was Haruto. He was Japanese and he was a year below me. He lived down the street at the new, beautiful condominiums, while I lived up the road in the Hispanic part of town. "You're late," he said while glaring at me harshly. His sharp jaw tensed in anger as he flipped his skater boy hairstyle to the side. Yeah, I know. Get in the fucking car, Haruto," I grumbled as I unlocked the doors and slid into the driver's seat. "I don't like being late, so if you're always going to do this, then just tell me and I will take the bus," he said in a deep, aggravated voice, running his hand through his long, silky black locks as he buckled his seatbelt. A good idea, considering I didn't technically have my license. As we sped off towards school, I listened to him ramble about all the homework he had and all the tests he had to study for. He was only a sophomore, but you'd think he was in my grade with how much he spoke about college and preparations. What about you? Have you started college visits yet? He asked as I fiddled around trying to sync my phone up to the Bluetooth, one hand on the steering wheel with my gaze darting back and forth between the road and my screen. Huh? Oh, nah. I don't think I'll go. I just want to travel, I said absent-mindedly. I'd heard that question from so many of my friends' parents that my response just came out automatically now. So what if I didn't want to go to college? What was the point? So I could have a bunch of debt that I could never pay off, which would lead me into a job that I hopefully wouldn't despise until 20 years later? The whole construct seemed very depressing, and since I knew how short life could be, I wasn't going to take any chances with the time I had left. I was going to do whatever made me happy, whenever I wanted to do it. As we pulled into school, Haruto quickly jumped out of the car and darted into the building as the first bell went off. Nerd, I thought to myself with a gentle smirk as I grabbed my bag and strolled into the building, in no hurry whatsoever. Walking into my chemistry homeroom class, I sat down next to my boyfriend, Tyler, and leaned in to give him a kiss as the final bell rang, and our teacher, Dr. 𝗵𝗲 walked into the room. She was from Romania and, in my opinion, way overqualified to teach high school chemistry. She had a strong accent, was in her mid-40s, and always wore bold lipstick. I liked it. She rocked it. Pulling away from my boyfriend, I leaned back in my chair and gave her my undivided attention. Even though I was selfish, smart-mouthed and indifferent, I wasn't rude to the people I respected. So, as my friend Jackie tried to speak to me while Dr. 𝗵𝗲 spoke, I gave her a quick glare to shut the fuck up. I know today is our field trip, but I would like to pass out your quizzes from last week before we begin our dismissal, she stated, her accent thick, which always made me smile. While she walked around and passed out the quizzes, everyone began to chat amongst themselves, so I turned my head to Jackie. What were you saying? I asked in a somewhat hushed tone. I was just asking if you were going to the race tonight, she said in a soft whisper. Ah, the race. I had forgotten. Every Friday there was a race in the back streets of my boyfriend's rich suburbs. The things wealthy kids do to keep busy, I thought with a chuckle. Yeah, I'll be there, I said as I reached out and gave my boyfriend Tyler's hand a gentle squeeze. We had been dating since we were 13, and although we hadn't done more than some heated makeout sessions, I knew that I would lose my virginity to him. I just didn't want to rush it. I was pulled out of my discussion when I heard my teacher clear her throat and lean down to my level. Lowering her voice, she looked me in the eye and passed me my test. Someone who should be getting A's in my class is getting C's. I expect more from you, Noah, she said with a disappointed look on her face. Frowning, I turned the paper up slightly to see the giant red C+ on my paper. Fuck. What a bitch. Am I right? I heard my friend Jackie whisper as she leaned over and checked out my grade, sporting the same grade herself. I loved Jackie. She was kind, sweet, and had the sexiest body I had ever seen. But when it came to school, well, she wasn't the brightest, which was why she was a senior in a junior-level chemistry class. Knowing we had gotten the same grade made my heart sink for a brief moment, but it was quickly replaced with indifference. I don't care about school anymore. It doesn't matter. I repeated to myself again and again as we boarded the giant buses that would take us to the museum. Hopefully looking at some dead people and pretty ancient jewellery would take my mind off of Dr. 𝗵𝗲's words. Pharaoh. I wrapped my right hand around the back of the slave's neck as she took my length into her mouth. Sighing, I let my head fall back and watched the Nile flow as the golden sun began to make its descent. I was finally beginning to relax when I heard someone clear their throat from behind me. "What?" I said in a flat tone, not looking away from the scene before me. "Pharaoh Ramesses, the general requests a short presence with you," my personal servant Shakir said in a smooth voice. "Fine," I said, and raised my hand from the girl's head, motioning with my middle and index finger for him to enter. "Pharaoh, please excuse my presence, but I must talk to you about the Mitanni dynasty. They are trying to attack our borders in Amuru. We must act fast," General Abrax said, while keeping his head bowed since it was prohibited to look upon a pharaoh without permission. "Then do what must be done," I replied in a bored tone before summoning another slave to my side. Reaching my gold-painted hand up and undoing the strings behind her neck, allowing the top of her dress to fall, exposing her breasts to me. A small smirk tugged at the corner of my lips as I began to trail my long fingers down the lines of feminine curves, still enjoying the feeling of the girl between my legs. "I understand, my pharaoh, but—" I heard him hesitate and finally look up. "I'm losing my patience," I said, wanting this conversation to end quickly so I could continue with my evening. In my mind, I was already bending the 2 sex slaves over my bed and watching them scream in pleasure. Our last battle with them, we lost many men and it lasted many months. Perhaps you could go to battle with us this time. You know you would be able to secure a swift victory for us, Abrax suggested, nerves clearly ringing in his voice. "Look at me," I boomed as I stood up suddenly, my white linen shendit falling down to cover my length as the girl who was between my legs fell backwards, catching herself on the palms of her hands at the last moment. Slowly, General Abrax raised his head to meet my gaze. He was a large man, around 6'4", 193 centimeters, but he looked like a mere ant compared to my 8', 244 centimeter stature. "Are you suggesting that me, a god, participate in a mortal battle? That I use my power to protect your weaklings?" I said, the anger and offense very clear in my voice. I am sorry, Pharaoh. I meant no disrespect, of course. I just thought that maybe it would be less troublesome for you if we had a swift victory, so you wouldn't have to hear about such things more than necessary. He stumbled over his words, causing me to smirk. He knew I could kill him with a snap of my fingers, but until this point, Abrax had never offended me, so I was willing to overlook this one time. "Go," I said simply, turning my attention back towards the 2 females that were now seated on a pile of pillows, covered in expensive silks and being fanned by palm leaves. Smirking at the devilish looks in both of their eyes, I began to stride towards them, not even waiting to hear the closing of the door before I began removing my clothing. This was going to be fun. Noah. As we all filed into the cold, expansive museum, I felt a strong arm wrap itself around my waist. Jumping slightly, I turned my head and saw my boyfriend giving me his gorgeous smile. Returning his smile, I tapped his chest lightly and leaned into his touch as the tour guide began separating us into groups. Of course, Tyler and I were in separate groups, but I didn't care. As we all started to file out, I discreetly slipped into Tyler's group and jogged slightly to catch up to him. Lacing my fingers through his and pushing my shoulder into his muscular bicep just slightly before adjusting my attention towards our tour guide. Tyler and I had first met in our church's youth group, which was a large reason why we were both still virgins. He was half Korean and half Irish, about 5'10", 178 centimeters, with brown hair and brown eyes. His skin was pale, and his body was well built since he was on our school's lacrosse team. He was one of the hottest boys in our school, and he knew it. We had been together for a while and gone through our share of ups and downs, but in the end we always came back to each other, no matter how many pointless fights we had. After my mum died, we developed a similar agreement to the one I had with my father. He would let me do what I wanted, when I wanted, as long as I didn't blow up his phone too much when he had his bro time. And here is the sarcophagus of the great Pharaoh Ramesses. As we unearth more history, we have learned that I started to tune out of the tour guide's speech when I felt Tyler's hand begin to snake its way down to my round ass, rubbing it softly before turning his body slightly to the side and pressing his erection into my hip. His gaze was still carefully tied to the guide, like he was completely guiltless. Biting my bottom lip, I followed his example, but began to discreetly rub myself against his bulge. Tyler loved to do this. He loved to touch me, innocently, and make me aware of his arousal, but it never went beyond that. At first I had been confused by his actions, but now I assumed I had figured out the reason. He wasn't ready to be completely physical, but by doing such actions in public, he could touch me without the pressure of ever having to take it further. Of course, no one would ever have sex in public, I thought. The rest of the tour went by in somewhat of a blur. In the beginning it had been fun, but as we listened to the guide drone on about how the people of Egypt believed that pharaohs were gods, I grew bored. Gods didn't exist. Not even the one true God. I rolled my eyes at the thought. I was raised Christian, but after my mum's death I didn't believe in anything. Not anymore. Moving on, we were brought to the part of the exhibit that I was the most excited about. The jewellery. I grinned widely and ran up to the giant glass wall that housed the most beautiful gems I had ever seen in my entire life. My eyes widened as I looked at the detailed artistry in complete fascination. The deep blues of the lapis lazuli perfectly complemented the vibrant reds and oranges of the carnelian stones, along with intricate beading that looked like it must have taken hundreds of hours to complete. The stones were large, but they were laid into the jewellery in such a way that it didn't look gaudy or distasteful at all. Wow! I breathed out in admiration before letting out a startled shriek when I heard a giant crash come from the next room over and a siren beginning to blare through the whole museum. "What the fuck is happening?" Tyler shouted in fear as the tour guide began to brush people in the direction of the exit with terrified eyes. "It's like fucking biohazard up in here," our friend Malcolm shouted over the siren. I mean, he wasn't wrong. The lights immediately dimmed and the rooms began to flash bright red as if it was a real zombie apocalypse or something. For a brief second, it seemed like there was possibly just some type of malfunction. But then we all heard something that made our blood run cold and our senses heighten beyond belief. Gunshots. Automatic-sounding gunshots. Before I could even process what was happening, everyone was screaming and running around in absolute panic. Even the once polite and refined tour guide was now shoving people out of the way to try and get towards the exit. However, it was all futile, as the room we were in became surrounded with men dressed completely in black and automatic weapons pointed at us. "Get down, I said get down! Hands on the ground where we can see them!" A man yelled in a deep voice as a few of the men ran to a glass case in the middle of the room, one I had not seen yet. Inside the display was a large gold necklace that was in the shape of a bird, its eyes some type of beautiful red gem. As I let my back slide down the cold glass and pulled my knees up to my chest, I couldn't help but let my gaze fall over the room, noticing that my boyfriend was nowhere in sight. Had he managed to get out? I wondered, before the cold fact hit me. If he did indeed get out, then that meant he left me. But I couldn't really blame him. People changed in the face of fear. I knew that fact all too well. I hoped he was safe, and that this would all be over soon. The loud buzzing of the micro-saw caused the person next to me to visibly jump, so I quickly mumbled under my breath, "Calm down, it'll all be over soon," while keeping my eyes trained to a spot on the floor. I can't, I've got to get out of here. I can't breathe, Noah." I heard the frantic hyperventilating and knew who it was. My friend, Jackie. "Calm down." I breathed out again quietly as I saw some black boots nearby out of my peripheral vision. I can't! Jackie suddenly screamed and stood up, my eyes shooting up to her as I saw the sheer horrified panic on her face. "Sit down!" The man's voice nearby boomed as I saw him quickly reach for his gun. In that moment, multiple things happened, none of which I was prepared for. Without even knowing what I was doing, I quickly shot up and pushed my friend to the side, lunging at the man as he began to wrap his finger around the trigger. At the same time, I heard the man with the micro-saw yelling, "I got it! We've got it! Let's get out of here!" However, as my gaze travelled to where the voice came from, I noticed that the eyes in the mysterious necklace they had just procured began to glow a bright red. Before I knew it, I heard the loud thunder of a gunshot, and then there was a flash of bright light, and everything went white. Noah. "Ah, what the fuck?" I groaned as I rolled onto my side and used my forearm to shield the bright light that was still managing to blind me with my eyes closed. After what had seemed like a few hours, but in reality was probably only a couple of minutes, I finally pulled myself up. Opening my eyes slowly, I looked around in utter confusion. All I could see for miles was rolling hills of sand. Where the fuck am I? I wondered out loud, before all the last moments of my life came flashing back. Oh, fuck. I'm dead, I said matter-of-factly as I groaned again and fell onto my back, the hot sand burning through my thin t-shirt. "Oh, Jesus!" I hissed and jumped up, brushing myself off as I looked around. Heaven sure was hot. Wait, was this heaven? I wondered before taking a deep breath and making my way in a random direction. Maybe this was hell with how fucking hot it is. That made more sense at least. The irony not being lost on me that my sudden belief system seemed to be making an appearance again. I wasn't sure how long I had been walking, but judging by how hot my cheeks felt, I would have ventured to guess 5 years. I was almost about to drop down when I suddenly heard hard thumping against the packed sand. What in the... I mumbled to myself as I used my hand as a visor to stare off into the distance. Horses. Not just horses. People. Waving my arms above my head, I screamed at the top of my lungs to try and get their attention. Much to my horror, my voice came out as a husky, harsh croak rather than its usual full sound. Damn dehydration. However, it didn't matter that my voice wasn't as strong as it usually was, because they were headed straight in my direction. I'm saved, I thought in relief. How wrong I was. As they galloped towards me, I began to worry that they wouldn't stop, their furious pace never once hesitating or slowing down. "Oh, shit!" I cried as I started to run in the opposite direction. The clopping of the horse's hooves getting closer and closer. Shit, shit, shit. I huffed to myself, thinking I should have ran more in Miss Jenner's PE class. Period cramps my ass, I thought right as I was knocked to the ground. I wiped the sand from my face as I slowly raised my head and looked at all the soldiers who surrounded me. They began to yell at me in a language I didn't understand, which caused me to furrow my brows in frustration. "What the fuck are you saying?" I shouted at them. "Speak English or Spanish. I don't understand," I yelled over their constant monologue to me. "What are you saying? I don't understand." I kept repeating over and over again, growing increasingly frustrated. Not English, Española, Chinese. I was all out of options as they continued to scream at me in a language I had never heard. Before I knew what was happening, I was yanked up by my forearm courtesy of a giant man who had dark brown hair and hazel eyes. I immediately noticed his handsome yet stolid face as I was thrown onto the front of a horse as if I was a sack of potatoes. Whoa, calm down, buddy. You know this is kidnapping," I screamed as he wrapped his arms around me and grabbed the reins, feeling his groin pressed into my backside. I inhaled sharply and glared at him over my shoulder. "Try anything and I'll throw us both off this horse," I said in a harsh whisper, knowing he wouldn't understand anything I said. Where we were going, I had absolutely no idea, and it caused a knot in my stomach to form. I wasn't sure how long we had been travelling, but I'd noticed it was getting considerably cooler. My eyelids were heavy with sleep, but I refused to give in, knowing that any moment could be my chance for escape. Eventually, we came over a sand dune, and I saw a metropolis laid out before us. My jaw dropped as I witnessed the pyramids being built in the bustling city. If this was hell, it definitely looked different than what I expected. It looked exactly like ancient Egypt. I scowled in frustration and tightened my grip on the horse's mane as we began our descent down the sand dune. As we travelled through the city streets, people parted and bowed their heads in respect. I didn't realise there was a classism in hell, I thought to myself. With that thought, I glanced around and realised that many children surrounded us, frowning to myself when I realised they were malnourished. "Don't you have some bread?" I mumbled to the man behind me as my delicate fingers began to search the pockets of his saddle. I didn't find any food, but I did find round pieces of metal, so without thinking I quickly threw the coins to the children around us. Earning a hard thrust forward from the man behind me, causing my pelvis to push sharply into the leather saddle. But I didn't care. At least they can eat tonight. Because I was observing everything, I hadn't realised that the horses were suddenly on a steep incline leading up a hill. Where are we going? Eventually I got my answer, as our horses galloped up a flight of marble stairs which led to an opulent palace that made the White House look like a shack. There were rows and rows of soldiers and servants, with their heads bowed all parting ways in the middle, so that your eye line was drawn up towards the centre of the palace with its open walls and tall columns. What was inside? I had no idea. I felt the weight behind me disappear as the general popped off the horse, grabbing under my arms and pulling me down as well. "Thanks," I muttered before I was roughly grabbed by the nape of the neck and dragged up the steps. "Hey, haven't you heard of manners?" I yelled as I tried to fight him off without any success. I wasn't sure what he said as he barked something at me and threw me onto the ground, but I had a feeling now wasn't the time to be disobedient. Remaining there on my knees, I stared at the ground and refused to raise my head. Again, I heard someone speak, but this time it came in the silky, smooth sound of a female. I slowly raised my head to look at a beautiful dark-skinned woman holding her hand out to me. She was dressed in a white linen dress with light purple silk wrapped around her waist. Wow, She's gorgeous, I thought to myself quietly as I slowly rose and took her hand. I had no idea what she was saying, but her gentle tone made me feel a little more at peace, so I allowed her to lead me off to the corner and down a dark hallway, into a room that was immediately filled with humidity. I realised almost simultaneously that I was in a female bathhouse, as multiple women lay there naked. The smell of cinnamon and a mixture of essential oils filling my senses. "It smells amazing in here," I mumbled to myself as I suddenly felt my mind go fuzzy, barely grasping the copper cup that was placed in my hand. The gorgeous female stepped towards me and used the palm of her hand to push the cup up towards my face, so I assumed she wanted me to drink. I felt the fruits touch my lips as the warm, red liquid slid down my throat. "Oh God, that tastes like melted candy," I said with an amused giggle as I let the rest trickle down my throat. It was worlds better than the cheap and highly flammable vodka and 𝗵𝗶𝗀 mixture that we usually drank at house parties. Looking down at my cup, I noticed that they had immediately filled it to the top again. I knew that I should be more concerned about my current predicament. Working the problem, as my guidance counsellor would say. But this was the first time I had finally felt a small fraction of comfortability, and I didn't want it to end so quickly and for reality to smack me across the face again. Damn, they really know how to treat a girl in hell, I mumbled to myself, figuring I was really dead or in some kind of coma trapped inside my own mind. I took another sip of wine as a few dark-skinned girls quietly led me towards a scented bath, which resembled a mini lap pool. As the warm, delicious-smelling water enveloped me, I let out a sigh of relief. My skin burned from being out in the sun all day, but I knew that it would slowly turn into a tan. Laying back in the water, I felt my own temperature begin to rise, the exhaustion finally washing over me as I slipped into a light, self-aware rest. Feeling a deep state of relaxation and fatigue, I groggily followed the woman's orders and rose from the bath. Standing completely naked in the open bathhouse, I felt no sense of insecurity as I swayed slightly back and forth, my eyes barely open. Hearing a loud door open, I jumped out of my comatose state, instantly, and looked towards the door just in time to see a large guard emerge. Once he approached me, he shouted something angrily and roughly yanked me by the arm towards the door he had just come from. Making our way out of the mirrored room, I noticed that they had dressed me in a burnt orange silk dress that complemented my skin tone perfectly, finishing it off with a braided gold rope tied tightly around my waist, which showed off my curvy figure in a way that I'd never been comfortable with. The deep V in the dress did nothing to hide my voluptuous breasts, and the delicate beaded jewellery just added unnecessary attention. Basically, this outfit was a nightmare. I tried my hardest to cover up my chest as I was dragged out to a narrow, dark hallway and thrown into a wide open hall. As my knees hit the hard, cold tile, bruising for sure, I heard a voice ring in my ears that was the smoothest yet core-shaking thing I'd ever heard. My long locks flowed around my shoulders as I finally willed myself to look up. The harsh transition from dim lighting to a brilliant luminescence took my eyes a few moments to adjust, but I never would have been prepared for what I saw. In front of me, sitting on a gold throne that extended outwards, as if he was sitting in the middle of the sun, was the most beautiful man I'd ever seen. His size rivaled that of a giant, I observed. His broad chest was exposed, and he was covered in gold paint. At least, I assumed it was paint. His long ebony hair flowed down to his waist, reaching just above his belly button, and it almost seemed as if we were in a Hollywood movie by the way it flowed lightly in the breeze. He was wearing gold jewellery around his wrists, ankles, neck and head, which made him appear even more godly. But what captured me the most was his piercing gold eyes. I had never seen such an intense eye colour in my entire life. The way they pierced through my soul caused me to squirm under his ablaze gaze. His defined jaw and sharp nose that led to perfectly full lips were enough to make goosebumps form on my skin. Was this person even human? There was no way. He wasn't a man. This was a god. I wasn't sure how tall he was, but as he sat on his throne, I observed the people around him and realized that this man was the largest man I had ever seen. Must be a world record. Again they began speaking in that unrecognizable language as I stared transfixed by his golden eyes. He had yet to break my eye contact, and I hadn't even realized the audible gasps that erupted around me as we made eye contact. Slowly the man on the throne stood up and walked down the steps towards me. While he descended the stairs, I realized that his body was indeed radiating gold, which meant my first thought had been correct. He was not human. Does he run hell? Is he a figment of my imagination? How did I even conjure up a being like this? I thought to myself as I stared up at the massive form that approached me slowly. He continued to speak words that I didn't understand, until eventually he subtly arched one of his perfectly groomed eyebrows. Raising his flawless hand, he pushed his long fingers together so that it formed a beautiful snap that echoed through the halls. I had no idea what had happened, but as his voice rang in my ears, I realized that I could suddenly understand him perfectly. "Where are you from?" he asked in a cold, deep, emotionless voice. "America?" I replied, not really sure what such a question would accomplish. "America?" he asked with a raised eyebrow, his deep voice booming. "Where is this?" he followed up. At this point, I had forgotten that we were surrounded by masses of people who stared at us in shock and awe. Well, someone hasn't had geography class in quite a while. I responded back before eventually pulling myself up so that I could stand on my own 2 feet, causing more gasps to erupt from the crowd. I realized that the man in front of me had suddenly furrowed his brow in complete and unrelenting fury. "Who are you?" he asked in a booming voice, towering over me in an attempt to intimidate me so that I had to crane my neck back to look at him. "Well, people call me Noah,"